I think we found our spot, friends. What do you think? Hello and welcome to another video. My name is Heather, and as always, I am reading with a vengeance, and as always, I hope you are as well. If you've been here before, thank you so much for coming back. If you're a new viewer, very warm welcome to you. I hope everybody is doing very, very well. So I think I settled into a good spot for my recordings. What do you think? I'm just kind of sitting in a recliner, have some books off to the side, got some cozy stuff. I tried a couple of locations in here, and there's really not a whole lot because every nook and cranny, and this isn't a complaint, but there are windows, lots of windows. And so I couldn't have direct light coming from behind me because that just wouldn't work. So we have these neat little blinds that kind of block out the light, so that's helpful. But I also needed natural light, so I had a hard time finding a good spot. And plus, it's pretty tight, pretty cozy in here, so to have enough space to sit comfortably, have some books in the background, and then have the camera a decent distance away, because there were some spots where I was going to be like this, and nobody wants to see that. So I think I found a good spot. I'm comfortable. It looks cozy. Does it look cozy? I think we're going to stick with this for a while. So today I'm going to talk about the books that I read in the second half of October. I did my mid-month wrap-up. I'll link that down below. I would have to say it was a difficult reading month. I might have mentioned that in my other video. It continued to be a difficult reading month. And was it a slump? It was a slump, but not a slump in the normal slumpy sense. It was slumpy, but not in the way where I didn't read, but in a way that I had to force myself to read, which is, that's not great. That's not a great way to have a good reading experience. But because I was kind of forcing myself to read, and I found myself distracted all the time, where I had to reread some lines or paragraphs or pages, I might have missed some details. So, full disclosure, I might have rated some of these books lower than I normally would have. So take what I have to say with a grain of salt. I'm going to explain each one, I think, in an appropriate amount of detail, but I might be hypercritical. And just to explain, I mean, if you haven't watched any of my other videos, I was completely distracted for the month of October because we sold our house, and we actually did the physical moving into our fifth wheel, which is where I'm living now, which is why there's a different space behind me. Moving just by itself, right, is stressful and anxiety inducing. But we moved from, I want to say 17 or 1800 square foot house into a 300 square foot fifth wheel. So we're basically full-time glampers, and we had to decide which stuff went to storage, because this isn't going to be a permanent thing. This is probably going to be a minimum of 6 months. But we had to decide what stuff was going to go in storage and what stuff was going to come with us. I had to find that balance of having what I needed, but not having too much, and trying to avoid buying duplicate things. Because I know I've talked about this before, I'm really trying to lead a minimalistic lifestyle. Short story long, all the logistics of not only moving, but moving from a big space to a small space, and then separating all your stuff and getting rid of stuff. I was distracted this month. Very distracted. On top of that, I was studying for my yoga practical because I'm trying to get certified to be a yoga instructor, and I had to give my 1 hour yoga practical class yesterday. I did that, passed. Yay! That was also on my mind. So hopefully November is going to be a much better reading month. I'm very excited for it because we're settled in. One last admin thing I want to say is that I was way behind, way delayed on responding to some of the comments on my previous videos. Those of you who watch regularly and comment and support my channel, I so appreciate you. So I'm so sorry for the delay in responding to your comments, but I see you, and hopefully I was able to respond to all of you. I don't think I missed anybody. And also, I'm super behind on Booktube. I watch a video here and a video there, and I'm just way behind. So if I haven't engaged with you when I normally engage with you, I'm really sorry, but I'm just behind. Anyways, let's get back to the books that I read in the second half of October. I believe I have 6 to talk about. Let's start with the stats. For October, I read a total of 10 books. I had 1 DNF. The first half of the month, I read The Storyteller, These Precious Days, Daytripper, This Is Going to Hurt, and Banned Book Club. I read a total of 4 women authors. I read 2 authors for people of color. I read 5 physical books and 5 audiobooks. I won't go into the specific genres here, but I do have to say, I think I missed the memo that it's nonfiction November, because I read more nonfiction in October than I think I read in any other month. And the only nonfiction I have, hopeful nonfiction that I have for November is Matthew Perry's memoir, if I can get my hands on it. So anyways, yeah, lots of nonfiction for October. My ratings were all over the place. I had 1 5-star, 1 4.5 star, 1 4-star, 2 3.5 star, 2 3-star, 1 2.5 star, 1 2-star, and 1 1-star, and then one DNF across the gamut. Okay, let's just start with the bad and work our way from there. My DNF of the month was The Name of the Wind by Patrick Rothfuss. I'll pop it up here. I checked it out. I checked the physical copy out from the library. You can't tell from this picture, but it is a doorstop. I think I showed it on a previous video, but it's a big, big book. And I picked this one up on the recommendation of my husband. Every once in a while, my husband will kind of do a reading swap where he will have me read one of his favorite reads, and I will have him read something that I absolutely love and want to share with him. And this is the one he picked for me. I picked Razorblade Tears for him. I feel like I was shorted a little bit. So I picked this up and he was so excited. I felt so bad. He was so excited about it. And then I read the synopsis and it didn't do anything for me. And then I read the first chapter and still nothing. And I powered through and powered through and powered through. And there was nothing. And it got to the point where I was dreading picking it up. There was nothing that was working for me. I can't even really explain to you what it's about. I mean, I suppose I could read the synopsis. Most of you, I'm sure, have heard of it. It's, I guess, a modern classic in the fantasy genre. Maybe. It says, told in Kavoth's own voice, this is the tale of the magically gifted young man who grows to be the most notorious wizard his world has ever seen. The intimate narrative of his childhood in a troupe of traveling players, his years spent as a near-feral orphan in a crime-ridden city, his daringly brazen yet successful bid to enter a legendary school of magic, and his life as a fugitive after the murder of a king form a gripping coming-of-age story unrivaled in recent literature. I mean, it just didn't work for me. The only thing it really had going for me, and that helped in me giving the effort that I gave it, is it did have short chapters. But it just seemed to go all over the place. It used weird magical world words and didn't explain it. I don't know. Maybe it just didn't explain the world well enough for me, and I just felt lost, like I was reading a foreign language. I gave it 60 pages before I DNF'd. Sorry, babe. The next book I read was Nosferatu by Joe Hill. I was super excited to get into this. I really like Joe Hill. And I say that based on the fact that I've only read one of his books, I think. But I read The Fireman, and I love that book so much, and it actually sparked my interest in reading again, because I had gone through a reading slump for a couple of years. I absolutely love The Fireman, so I was really looking forward to this. My husband and I watched the series, the first season of the series, when it first came out. So it's been a couple of years, I think. And we enjoyed it. It was okay. I listened to this book, and it was narrated by Kate Mulgrew, who I love her voice. I love her as an actor. And I was excited that she was reading this story. Unfortunately, I feel like she went over the top, which is, I think that's something that can happen when you have somebody who is putting a voice to a book, putting a voice to a story, and they're voicing different characters, and they want each of the characters to be distinct and to come alive. And sometimes you can just go too far. And I think Kate Mulgrew did. She made the characters, especially the villain, Charlie Manx, just cartoony. that's the best way I have to describe it. She just kind of made him into a caricature of a villain, and it was just cringy. So let me tell you what it's about. So this follows Vic, and it starts off with her as a child, and she's the child of volatile parents, a father who is not over the top abusive to her mother, but every once in a while they get into it with each other. So she has kind of a strained relationship with both of them. She discovers as a child that when she gets on her bicycle, and she rides over this particular covered bridge in her small town, she is transported to another place, another time, and she can find things that are lost or missing. And then she grows up and she kind of grows out of it. And because she never really had a full understanding, it happened when she was so young, she goes through a period of time where she struggles with addiction and mental health issues. And she spends some time in a mental health institution or rehab or both. Ultimately, she recovers and she's able to lead a normal life. You're also following Charlie Manx, who is the villain of the story, and he is basically he's a vampire, but not in your traditional sense of a vampire, because he is many, many hundreds of years old, I think, and he abducts children and he takes them to his domain, which he refers to as Christmas Land, and he turns these children into vampires. And in his mind, he is giving these children a better life, because normally the children that he preys upon are children who come from broken homes or have some kind of strife in their home. He takes them and he brings them to Christmas Land, where they will live forever and ever as his children, and they'll be happier. So anyways, when Vic, at one point when she crosses over this bridge, she is also abducted by Charlie, but she ends up escaping. That, coupled with this magical power that she's discovered, kind of wrecks her brain a little bit. Fast forward, she has a child of her own. She's raising him by herself, but she has a good relationship with her child's father. She's living her life, doing her thing with her son, and Charlie comes back to exact revenge on Vic for escaping from him, and he takes Vic's son. And the story goes from there. Charlie Manx drives around in this haunted Rolls Royce called the Wraith. I didn't find that scary. Christmas Land, I didn't find scary. They call the house that they're taken to the sleigh house. You know, there's kind of a double entendre with that word, sleigh like Christmas or sleigh like kill. And, I just didn't find that scary. Charlie Manx takes on kind of a sidekick to help him steal children. And it's this man that lives in Vic's neighborhood. And he's referred to as the gas mask man. I didn't find him scary. He was creepy, yes, but referring to him as the gas mask man, it just didn't ring as scary to me. The House of Sleep, it just was all too cartoony, and it just didn't work for me. The only thing that really I did find creepy and scary were the evil children. I mean, that in any story, when children are evil, it is scary to me. But that's pretty much it. I found it way, way, way too long. I think it was like 17 hours. The audiobook was 17 hours long. I didn't really connect with any of the characters, with the exception of Lou, which was the father of Vic's child. But they didn't spend enough time with him. And the end was dull and predictable, really. I gave this one 2 stars. The next book I read for the month of October was No One Is Talking About This by Patricia Lockwood. Or everybody was talking about this at some point last year. I listened to this as an audiobook. And when I was reading the reviews, I read that the experience that most people had with it was that the first half of the book was kind of, I don't know, dull, not really engaging, there wasn't really a plot. And then the second half of the book is when the plot happens and then it becomes amazing. I didn't have that experience. So the first half of the book, basically you're following this unnamed narrator who is a social media influencer. She refers to the internet as a portal, and she is traveling around the world kind of talking about her experience as a social media star and, you know, having talks with her fans and that kind of thing. And during that first half of the book, she's talking about all the crazy stuff that you see or hear about on the internet. The sheer tonnage of useless information that's out there on the internet, the sheer tonnage of useful information, but too much information about one topic, and just the craziness that is the internet. And most of that, not all of it, but most of it I found amusing, entertaining. Like, I found myself nodding my head like, yep, I watched that video, or I read that article, and yes, I lost hours of my life on this particular topic, you know, falling down this rabbit hole or that rabbit hole, and just completely waste of time, right? So I found a lot of that useful, but after a while it just got boring, and I'm like, okay, let's get on with the story. Where the story begins is when this unnamed narrator finds out her sister gives birth to a child with a very serious illness, and you're following just what that does to a family. But it doesn't really get too involved with the narrator's life or her sister's life. It felt very fragmented. I felt very detached from the story, and maybe I just didn't get it. I don't know. I just didn't have a good time with this. It wasn't what I expected. I think what I expected, the no one is talking about this, and I knew that it was about, you know, the damaging characteristics of social media and the internet, and I just felt like it would take one section of that and kind of run with it with a plot line, and that's not what happened. At least that's not what I got out of it. I gave this one 1 star. So that's 3 books in a row that I did not get along with. We have a 1 star, a 2 star, and a DNF. What I decided to do was look for some short stories or some short books that, you know, that can have a good punch, that I can get through quickly and maybe get some, you know, immediate satisfaction. The first one I found was Cold, Cold Heart by Karin Slaughter. As you know, I'm a Karin Slaughter fan, and I knew she wouldn't disappoint. This was a super, super short story. I think it's only available on audiobook. I want to say it's either 1 hour or 2 hours. This follows Pam and John, and Pam and John were married for a good many years. I want to say like 20 years. And then John cheated on Pam and divorced her, and then became super successful after he writes this book. John is horrible to Pam, horrible to her. He ends up moving to California, and she's still living, I don't know, in the Midwest or on the East Coast. Pam is super, super bitter, super bitter. She's still struggling, you know, still driving this 20-year-old beater Honda car, I think, and having to go to her horrible job that she hates. Meanwhile, her ex-husband is living the life of Riley in a mansion in California, all the cars, traveling the world to talk to his readers, and she's super bitter. Then one day, John calls her out of the blue and says, I'm dying of cancer. I don't have much longer. Will you please come out? I want you with me when I go. And she says, well, what about your fancy new wife? And he's like, no, I want you. Against her better judgment, she goes. And I won't spoil it. If you listen to audiobooks, his intentions aren't what he says they are. Her reaction isn't what you'd think it would be. And it's just a cute little story of revenge. And, you know, I got a kick out of it. It wasn't fantastic, but it did what it needed to do. It reignited my joy for reading after the 3 books that I talked about. I gave it 3 stars. So I decided to continue on and try to find another one, another short story to read, and maybe turn into the shorter stories, keeping my attention and my focus, and maybe that would be a trend. So I listened to Partners by John Grisham. Now, Partners is a prequel to one of his previous novels called Rogue Lawyer. Partners follows Sebastian Rudd, who is the main character in Rogue Lawyer. Sebastian Rudd is an attorney, and he basically takes on cases that nobody else will touch. So in Partners, you actually follow T-Ray, And T-Ray's a young man. He is kind of a drug runner in a small town, small-time drug runner. And he has just dropped off his stash to his boss, and he's walking down the street, and all of a sudden somebody in plain clothes comes at him with a gun, telling him to put his hands up and drop to his knees. He's the police. And T-Ray does that, but the man keeps yelling at him and then starts inexplicably shooting at him. T-Ray is able to find cover behind a car. I think he's grazed by a bullet on the elbow, but he's realizing this man is going to murder him unless he fires back. And so T-Ray takes his gun out, shoots the guy, shoots him dead. And it turns out that guy was an undercover police officer. It's never really explained why the police officer just shoots at him for no apparent reason. T-Ray is arrested and charged for the murder of a police officer. That police officer's partner shows up, tells a total lie as to what happened, and enters Sebastian to take his case and defend him. And Sebastian gets a lot of flack for defending a cop killer. And the story goes from there. It kept my interest. One of the things that I think John Grisham does very, very well is he really develops characters in a really colorful way in a short period of time. So while this was only 2-hour long short story, I really felt connected to Sebastian. I felt connected to T-Ray. I wanted to know why this police officer did what he did. I really enjoyed the story for what it was. I will say this is one of the ones, he's done this before. John Grisham paints cops in a really, really bad light, and sometimes it really kind of bugs me. There was absolutely no explanation in this story of why the cop just was going to murder T-Ray. You know, T-Ray was doing everything he was being told to do, and the cop just shot at him. I didn't really appreciate that. Just reading, even if I had no background in law enforcement, or even if I didn't feel the emotional connection I do to police officers, I'd want to know, just from the point of listening to a story, why did that happen? And it was never explained. So that was kind of a problem for me, but story did what it was meant to do, and that is tell the story of how Sebastian finds somebody he can trust. He's the most unpopular lawyer in town, and he needs somebody he can trust to work for him, to be his driver, to be his clerk, to be his bodyguard. And when Sebastian Rudd takes T-Ray's case and helps him, he ends up finding all those things in T-Ray. And that was the point of the story, and it met that point successfully. I gave this 3 stars. The next book I read for the month of October was The Whisper Man by Alex North. I read this physical copy, but I had the hardcover, but I didn't have the cover for whatever reason. I think my friend sent it to me. So anyways, I'll pop that right up here, and I've already donated it to a little free library. This is a horror/thriller. This was my first Alex North book, and I will continue to read his books. So this follows Tom, who, after the sudden death of his wife, moves his young son Jake to a new town for a fresh start. This also follows Pete, who is a detective, and he's been a detective for a long time. And Pete is haunted by a missing child case from 20 years ago. He captured the abductor, who was known as the Whisper Man, and sent him to prison. But one of the many boys that he abducted and murdered was never found, and he refuses to give it up. So Pete's been haunted for 20 years trying to find the remains of this boy. When Tom and Jake move into town, boys go missing again, even though the Whisper Man is in prison. And Pete is assigned to help the main investigator, I believe her name is Amanda, on this case, because the MO of the most recent boy who's gone missing is similar to when the Whisper Man was on the prowl. So Amanda has Pete come and help her with this investigation. While that's happening, Tom and Jake Tom is struggling communicating with his young son. I believe Jake is 8 or 9, and Jake has an imaginary friend. He's a little standoffish. He talks to his imaginary friend a lot, so he doesn't have a whole lot of friends at school because the kids at school think he's a little bit of a weirdo. And Tom is struggling. He's dealing with his own grief. He knows Jake is dealing with grief, and he doesn't know how to talk to his son. So they're having a hard time. One night he finds Jake downstairs and he's talking to somebody through the mail slot. And Tom swears he sees like fingers come through the mail slot, and he hears the voice say, "Jake, let me in." And it just totally freaks him out. He calls the police. Amanda and Pete catch wind of this incident. And even though the Whisper Man is in prison, they've started to believe that he had an accomplice way back when. And they believe now that the accomplice is the one who is responsible for abducting this latest boy that's gone missing. So when they hear of this incident with Jake, they are afraid that this accomplice is now focusing on Jake. So these two storylines come together in that way, and the story goes from there. I think I expected a little bit more of a supernatural element to this story. You know, he's called the Whisper Man, and to me, that has like boogeyman vibes to it, but it didn't have that. But it was still, I wish I didn't have that expectation, because I think if I didn't have that expectation, I probably would have rated this book a little bit higher. I did enjoy this story. It was a good thriller story, good suspense story about bad guy, young boy, a crime that happened years ago and now is starting to reemerge in the present day. There's family drama here. There's a struggle between a boy and his dad that I don't know why, but I really gravitate towards that. So I really enjoyed this story. I probably would have given it 4 stars if it was any other month, but I gave it 3.5 stars. I would recommend this book. It was very well written. I really liked his writing style because you kind of go back and forth. There's a connection between the two storylines that I told you about that I didn't expect, that I really enjoyed. I will be reading Alex North again in the future. I did give this 3.5 stars. So that is it. Those are the books that I read for the month of October. Not an incredibly great reading month. I'll have to say my favorite of the month was The Storyteller by David Grohl. I absolutely love that book, and it was my only 5-star of the month, and I absolutely loved it. So highly recommend that one. I hope you got some insight out of the books that I talked about. Did you have a good reading month? I really hope you had a better reading month than I did. Tell me, please, did you have some 5-star books this month? Did you have some books that you absolutely fell in love with? I want to know. I need to know. I will take all of your recommendations. Please feel free to comment down in the doodly-doo. Keep your fingers crossed that November is a better reading month. Hopefully I'll have some more 4 and 5 stars for next month. If you're still watching, please consider giving that like button a boop, and a subscribe would be wonderful. Thank you, thank you, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next time. Bye-bye.